If you think the Middle Ages were all castles, knights, and banquets, get ready for a reality check. Because behind the epic films, there were customs so bizarre and terrifying that they would make even a horror movie seem tame. Imagine being buried alive by mistake, having to kiss your executioner before your execution, or even watching a corpse being judged in court. Yes, it really happened. And today you will learn about 10 medieval customs so disturbing that they will give you nightmares. So, adjust the lights, get comfortable, and try not to freak out. Because what you're about to see is terrifyingly real. The judgment of God. Torture as a test of innocence. Imagine you're being accused of a crime. But instead of a judge reviewing the evidence, they decide to throw you tied up in a river or make you stick your hand in boiling oil. If you survive, congratulations, you're innocent. But now you're missing a hand or nearly drowned. If you die, well, at least you've proven that you weren't guilty. This was basically the judgment of God in the Middle Ages. The courts didn't trust witnesses or evidence much, so they came up with a brilliant, or rather brutal way to decide guilt: ordeals. The accused had to walk on hot coals, hold a hot iron, or even be thrown into water while tied up. If the burn got infected, guilty. If you drowned and died, innocent. But hey, it was too late. It sounds like a horror movie script, but it was real. Medieval justice was like a cruel game where regardless of the outcome, you lost. And to think that today we complain about traffic fines. Ghoulish weddings! When the dead and the living got together. Imagine showing up at a wedding, expecting a beautiful ceremony, only to realize the groom is dead. And no, this isn't a Halloween prank. In medieval times, marrying a corpse was actually a thing. Sounds like something out of a horror movie, right? But for some families, it was just another Tuesday. Why did they do it? Well, money and power, of course. If a nobleman died before getting married, his family could still go ahead with the wedding. They would dress the corpse, perform the ceremony, and voila! The bride was now officially part of the family. This meant she could inherit lands, titles, and all that medieval VIP treatment. Scary? Absolutely. But in an era where people believed in ghosts, witches, and curses, marrying a dead guy wasn't even the weirdest thing that could happen. So the next time you feel like your love life is a mess, remember, at least you're not saying yes to a rotting husband. Cannibal feasts, extreme hunger, and the last resort. Imagine being so hungry that a piece of stale bread seems like a 5-star meal. Now, imagine being so hungry that you start looking at your neighbor as if he were a roast chicken. Welcome to the Great Famine of 1315-1317, where food was so scarce that some people resorted to the unthinkable, eating other people. It started with livestock dying, crops failing, and people scavenging through garbage for anything remotely edible. But when there was nothing left, well, let's just say that cemeteries weren't just for mourning anymore. Some even dug up corpses because, hey, desperate times call for very desperate measures. Of course, this was no ordinary medieval dinner. Party. This was pure survival. And while it may sound like something out of a horror movie, for many, it was the only option left. So the next time you're starving because lunch is late, be thankful you're not living in the 1300s. The breath of death. The fear of premature burial. Imagine waking up in total darkness, unable to move, and realizing you're inside a coffin. Sounds like a nightmare, right? Well, for some unfortunate souls in the Middle Ages, it was a reality. Being buried alive wasn't just a horror story. It actually happened. Back then, doctors weren't exactly experts at confirming death. No heartbeat, no problem. To the grave you go. Sometimes people in deep comas or with illnesses that slowed their breathing were mistaken for dead. And since waiting too long to bury a body was considered unsanitary, well, you get the idea. How do we know this? Archaeologists have found coffins with deep scratches on the inside, proof that some poor souls woke up 6 feet underground and desperately tried to get out. That's why some people were buried with a rope attached to a bell. Above ground, if they woke up, they could ring it for help. Talk about a wake-up call. The corpse feast. Feasting among the graves. Imagine being invited to a feast only to realize it's taking place in a cemetery. In some cultures, people believe that eating and drinking on the graves of their loved ones to help their souls transition to the afterlife. Nothing says rest in peace like a good feast, right? These weren't just small, quiet gatherings. Oh no, we're talking full-on feasts with music, laughter, and plenty of wine, right on top of the gravestones. Some even left food out for the dead, just in case they got hungry in the afterlife. Others went a step further and ate meals made with grave dirt, believing it gave them a spiritual connection to the deceased. Creepy? Absolutely. But for them, it was a way to honor and stay close to their loved ones. Plague masks, the horror of death doctors. Imagine that you are sick, feverish, and suddenly a figure appears at your door. Black cloak, somber hat, and a mask with a bird's beak. Congratulations, you have just received a visit from a plague. Doctor! But relax, this does not mean that you will get better. In fact, it means exactly the opposite. These doctors were the experts at the time of the Black Death, a disease that killed millions. They believed that the plague was transmitted by bad air, so they filled the beak of the mask with aromatic herbs to purify what they breathed. Spoiler, it didn't work. But let's face it seemed like something out of a horror movie. For the sick, seeing one of these doctors was like seeing death itself knocking on the door. After all, most of them did not leave alive after this visit. Creative punishments. Punishments that chill the soul. If you think getting a parking ticket is harsh, medieval punishments would leave you speechless. Back then, they didn't just punish criminals, they turned it into a show. And trust me, you didn't want front row seats. Take the iron cage, for example. Imagine being locked in a small metal cage, hanging in the town square like a medieval piñata, except there was no candy, just suffering. You'd stay there, rain or shine, until, well, you weren't anywhere anymore. Then there was Iron Maiden. No, not the band, the torture device. It looked like a coffin, but it was lined with spikes inside. They'd place the victim inside, slowly close the doors, and let the spikes barely pierce the skin. It wasn't meant to kill you outright, just to make sure you truly regretted your life choices. Brutal, absolutely. But in medieval times, justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about putting on a gruesome show. The curse of the changeling child. Babies supposedly replaced by demons. Imagine that you're born in the Middle Ages and for some reason you cry a lot or look different. Congratulations! Some people already think that you're not a real baby, but rather a demon in disguise. Yes, that was medieval logic. These babies were called changelings, children who supposedly had been stolen by fairies or demons and replaced by evil imposters. No one thought about genetic diseases or medical conditions. If a baby was very sick, different, or even too smart, that was it. Blame the fairies. The worst. Some families resorted to very cruel methods to try to get rid of these curses, such as abandoning the child in the forest or even burning it to force the real child to return. Today we know that these children probably just had some medical condition, but in the Middle Ages, science was still good, traded for fairies. The kiss of death. The most bizarre execution. Imagine being about to be executed, and as if that wasn't bad enough, you also have to give your executioner a little kiss before you die. Weird. Yes. But in the Middle Ages, this was the reality for some condemned people. This bizarre ritual was called the kiss of death. Basically, before being brutally executed, traitors had to kiss the executioner's hand, cheek, or even mouth. Yes, very uncomfortable. The idea was to symbolize total submission, a last very ironic thank you before the end. But wait, it got even worse. Some reports say that executioners sometimes use lips coated in poison, turning a kiss into a fatal blow in itself. In other words, if the sword didn't get you, the poison took care of the rest. Romantic? Not at all. Macabre? Definitely. The cult of the dead. When corpses were tried. If you think that drama only happens while you're alive, medieval times would politely disagree, because back then even corpses could be tried. And no, we're not talking about a ghost court. That actually happened. The most famous case? The Cadaver Synod. Picture this, it's the year 897 and Pope Formosus has been dead for months. But his enemies weren't done with him yet. So what did they do? They dug him up, dressed him in full papal robes, sat him on a throne, and put him on trial. Yes, they literally had a court debate with a rotting corpse. Of course, poor Formosus. Couldn't defend himself for obvious reasons, so a monk had to speak on his behalf. Spoiler, it didn't help. The court found him guilty, stripped him of his title, cut off 3 of his fingers, and threw his body in the river. Medieval justice, where not even death could free you from your problems. So did you manage to watch it all the way through without feeling a shiver? The Middle Ages were definitely not for the faint of heart. Now tell me in the comments, which of these customs did you find the most bizarre? Or better yet, if you had to live in that era, which one would you never be able to face? I want to see your most creative answers. If you enjoyed this dark dive into the past, you know what to do. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos. Here we always bring you the most shocking facts in history, the ones that no one tells you. See you in the next mystery.